text in Proverbs 29:25 as we start. So let's say it together. You ready? Proverbs 29:25. The fear of man brings a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord shall be safe. So we're starting off looking at some texts on the law. And so let's look at Proverbs 28. Proverbs 28, verse 4. So who will read that? Proverbs 28, verse 4. Dennis?
Those who forsake the law praise the wicked, but such as keep the law contend with it.
Okay. So which is better? This is probably an obvious question. Which is better, to praise the wicked or to resist them or contend with them? I think the NIV, yours, is that the NIV that resist? Which is it? That's the New King James? So the New King James uses the word resist. Or contend. Contend is New King James, right. And resist is the NIV. So which is better, to praise the wicked or to resist them, to contend with them, to strive with them? Strive might even, as I thought about it, might even include striving for their salvation. You know, not necessarily just fighting them or contending with them, but maybe striving for their salvation. But you see the contrast there. Is keeping the law important? You know, would any Christian today say, well, I think it's good to praise the wicked? But that's what it says when we forsake the law. That's what we're doing. We're praising the wicked, right? It gives us some idea of the importance of keeping God's law. Again, not as the root of salvation, but as the fruit of salvation, right? We don't keep the law to be saved. We keep the law because we have been saved by Jesus. So we need to keep that in perspective. But God is still concerned about how we view the law. Do we hold it in high regard? How about verse 7? Another text on the law. Proverbs 28, verse 7. Bob, you have that? Okay. So seems like kind of an unusual contrast here, right? We have those who keep the law versus one who's mine says a companion of gluttons. What was your word? A riotous man. Okay, a companion of gluttons. We have one who keeps the law, and we have on the other side one who's a companion of gluttons. What do you think Solomon's point is? What's a glutton? A sinner? Okay. And gluttony is a violation of God's law because is gluttony about self-control? Right? Is that one of the fruits of the Spirit? Self-control. In fact, is keeping God's law about self-control? In kind of a bigger sense? You know, it seems like adultery, is that about self-control? Well, I mean, not committing adultery. Not committing adultery, but not committing adultery. Is that a commandment about self-control? You know, is stealing, is coveting? Those are things, right? Even honoring your parents, right? Is that about self-control? It's saying, I'm not going to let self live that riotous life that it would love to live, right? I'm going to live a life of self-control. So I'm not going to do those things that just come into my mind that seem like they would be fun or seem like they would give me pleasure for the moment or seem like they would advance my life in some way for the moment. Those are all, you know, the opposite of self-control. Self-control says, I won't do those things. And so gluttony is perhaps the easiest to see where someone doesn't have self-control, but keeping God's law is all about self-control, it seems. Even when it says, you know, don't have other gods before me, the natural inclination is to put self first, right? And when you put a tether on self and you say, I'm not going to put self first as the God in my life, that's also about self-control. Don't you think? So, God wants discerning children. Self is always struggling for the mastery, but it leads to destruction. So those who keep the law are discerning children, or he who keeps the law is a discerning son.
Not only does God create or recreate our mind, but he also...
Read verse 9. Who has verse 9? Proverbs 28, verse 9. Okay, one who turns away from hearing the law. Is that what it says, hearing the law? Even his prayer is an abomination. Does that mean if we're not perfect that God won't hear us? No. What's the point here? Okay. What does it say about your love for God if you won't keep his law? If you love me, keep my commandments. So in other words, if we know what's right, if we know what God has asked, and we turn away from that, do something else, it's just a charade, right? It's just a play. It's just something we're putting on a show. But we don't really love God, right? Our prayers, I mean, if you really don't love God, why would you pray to him? Just going through the motions. That's right. And God says, I hate that, right? There's nothing genuine in that at all. And in fact, we're just going through the motions. And why would we just go through the motions? For help? Okay, so what I put was that we want to get something out of God. Right? Would we go through the motions because we think we could get something out of him? I mean, there might be two ways. I mean, as a show, and that's the other reason. So for the people that don't love God, for the people that don't keep the law, that don't have any regard for the law, It says, even their prayer is an abomination. So I'm asking, why would somebody who doesn't want to keep God's law, why would they pray? That was my question. And I think the two reasons that we've thought of is, number one, it may just be for others to see, right? Well, I'll get more votes if people see me as a religious person, right? So it could be purely for getting something out of, other people. And the other reason may be that I think I'm going to get something out of God, right? What could I get out of God by praying to Him? Okay, so and maybe some of them are honestly doing that, right? Bob says whenever a crisis comes, and death may be staring us in the face, or critical illness of a spouse or child, then many people who've never cracked the book and have never prayed a prayer come to God. But even then, right, many of them do so from wrong motives, right? Were their prayer answered, they would immediately return to their same life of sin and perspective of having no regard for God. There are some who in that crisis mode may actually change, right? The thief on the cross seemed to, we're told that he was an honest, in that crisis mode, he prayed to the Son of God, and his prayer was an honest one. But so often it isn't, right? We can't know from a human perspective, but God says, if you don't keep my law, even your prayers are an abomination. Again, I think many pretty strong words, and pretty strong words for those who say that God's law was done away with, right? Are there Christians that say they love Jesus, that say, well, God's law was nailed to the cross, right? It's not of any value in the times in which we live. And again, Solomon says to those people, if you would do away with God's law, even your prayer is an abomination. Dennis had last week brought something on the law. He's been having a conversation with a patient about whether God's law is still valid now or not. And, again, a Christian man who's having this discussion with Dennis. Hard to imagine almost, But Dennis did put at the very end, he went through a text from the Old Testament and the New Testament. And again, as you think about the texts that talk about the importance of God's law, I mean, they're just huge numbers through the entire Bible. You just can't read the Bible as a whole and not come away with the impression that the law of God is very important. But he put at the very end, it seems like that most people don't have any problem with 9 of the commandments. Nobody wants to go out and steal or kill or commit adultery or have other gods before the true God. But it's one commandment only that people seem to get stuck on. Bob? So Dave points out the fact that God's law is a guideline, and he was looking at the speed limit signs. I thought he was going to talk about the white line beside the road. But I like the white line, you know, it may be even better, right? Have you ever tried to drive in the fog and you can't see anything and the white line keeps you right in the lane? You know, if there was no line? Yeah, yeah. Okay. So sometimes maybe the principles might not be clear, snow might be covering up that white line, but having experienced God's law in the past, having memorized His law, having seen it applied to your life, even when maybe in this situation things seem kind of murky, we can go back and say, no, this is really what God has taught me in the past, and I know this is the right thing to do, even though it doesn't seem clear at this point. Okay, Bob? The second paragraph. Where is that, Sabbath or Sunday? Oh, let's see. Well, somehow I'm not finding it. Read it again. Oh yeah, the third paragraph. The acquisition of wisdom does not depend on intellectual or spiritual exercises. It is essentially related to obedience to a law that lies outside ourselves, our culture, our personal psychology, and our desires. Well, okay, but it lies outside the natural man. Well, but So Bob's struggling a little bit with the Quarterly's comment that God's law lies outside of our desires and outside of our hearts and our culture and our personal preferences and ideas. I mean, I think, of course, what the Quarterly is trying to say is we all want to mold God's law to fit our preferences, right? Our likes and dislikes. Well, that part I'm not really excited about, and I don't think that it means that because, you know, I really don't want to follow that particular precept. And so we try to tailor it to fit our wants so that it seems like we're keeping God's law, but it's our own personal version of God's law. It's not God's law at all. I think that's perhaps the big point. And of course, that's the tendency of the natural man, right? To make my behavior acceptable by changing the standard. And what the author is saying is, of course, is that's not the way God's law works. God's law works as something that God has set from the outside, from above us, to say this is what truth is. And you're not the final arbiter of truth. I am the final arbiter of truth. I will tell you how things work. And you need to listen, right? You need to follow. You need to be obedient. Bob's point is that as we become converted, God writes His law in our hearts. And now we're not doing something just because God said so, but because we've been changed and we want to do that. Okay? And yes, go ahead. Okay. Okay. So again, just taking a very personal view and saying, God has put every one of those precepts there because He wants it to improve my life. Okay, and along with Bob's point, let's look at Galatians 3:24. I think this kind of is a follow-up to Bob's point about God's law in our hearts, but Galatians 3:24. Who's reading? Okay, so the law is a schoolmaster. Mine says a tutor. How is the law a schoolmaster? A tutor? Okay. Okay, I didn't know I was coveting until the law said you should not covet, and I said, oh, I've done that. Okay, I'm doing that. So as we see our lives up next to the law of Christ, we become convicted that we're not doing what the law says. We're not living up to that standard of character. We don't have the character of Christ. We see ourselves as sinners, right? Now, read verse 25 then. Continue on. So we're still in Galatians 3, verse 25. Okay, so after the faith has come, we're no longer under the schoolmaster. What does that mean? Does it somehow erase the importance of God's law? When faith has come, that stuff is no longer important. Is that what it's saying? What's that? You don't believe that? Okay. So what's Paul? He wants to keep reading. Okay, so what is the point then that that now that faith has come, we're not under the tutor? What does that mean? What's that? Well, Paul is using the law as the tutor. Okay, the law as the schoolmaster. Now we're under grace. So what did that do to the schoolmaster? Okay. So Audrey says it means that we don't need to be controlled by the schoolmaster because we are now controlled by His Word that lives where? In our hearts, right? So this is what I was saying just a minute ago. We now obey not because we're told to. We obey because we want to, right? It's written in our heart. So it's not that the law has become unimportant. It's not that the teaching of the tutor is useless. The point is we don't need the tutor to say, the schoolmaster, Ellen White even uses the word a harsh schoolmaster, disciplinarian. You need to listen. You didn't listen, so I'm going to dock you. You're going to.
We have Christ in our heart. In His Spirit in us. So there are things, and we learn what He was. And we are to tell others not.
Okay, so talking about us becoming a tutor. Okay, and there's probably some truth to that. I'm thinking in this sense, at least, that the law is the tutor. And for each of us, there has been a period in our life, certainly as children, you often obey because you're told to, not because you understand, but because you're told to do so. And of course, there's a time in life when that's appropriate, right? When maybe you don't understand, but you do so because your parents said to do it that way. That's not the ideal, though, throughout your whole life. If that's the only reason you ever obey, you're still under the tutor, right? You're still under the harsh schoolmaster. God hasn't changed your own life, right? God hasn't put His law in your mind. So then it's always an external thing. And that isn't God's ideal, right? The law starts as an external thing, but He wants it to become an internal thing. And now we don't need the tutor to have the rod over us because we obey because we want to. Okay, so the law was to bring us to Jesus, and now that we've met Jesus, we've been adopted as sons. I think this will go on. Galatians 3 goes on to talk about the difference between slaves and sons, right? Again, slaves obey because they're told to, right? You have to do it, right? Sons obey because it's in their hearts, right? This is how they want to. They're part of the family. And that's the difference even between children and sons, right? Children don't understand the principles of belonging to the family and how things work. They're immature yet. But as we mature into true children of God, mature children of God, then we obey because He's changed our hearts. We obey because... Look at Galatians 3 still, verse 26. Do 26 and 27. 26 and 27. Okay, so you're all children of God by faith in Jesus Christ, or okay. So you've all been baptized with Christ and have clothed yourself with Christ, right? In other words, you've come to Christ, you've taken off the old garments and you've put on the new garments. You're sons, and now you obey because you want to, because you've been changed, because you're wearing His character. And in Galatians 4, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Now I say, as long as the heir is a child, he doesn't differ from a slave, though he's the owner of everything. But he's under guardians and managers until the date set by his father." Again, do you see that children and slaves obey because they're told to? But sons, when they've matured, obey because they're sons. Okay. So if we've been baptized, we've been accepted as children of the Father, and that's a change in our whole attitude. Read Proverbs. I think it's 28:25. Let me see. No, is that right? I've somehow written down the wrong. 28 verse 5, that's what it is. Proverbs 28 verse 5. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here. 28 verse 5. Karen? Okay, so evil men don't understand justice, but those who follow the Lord understand completely. Completely. Okay, or mine says understand all things. So take these two parts. Evil men do not understand justice. How do you see that happening in our world today? Evil men do not understand justice. Okay. Okay. But if you were a judge, you'd probably understand justice no matter what, right? What? Oh. You mean a judge that committed adultery would have a hard time understanding justice? Okay. Okay. So, what's that? Okay. Okay. And I think even, I think it's probably even difficult to judge rightly according to the laws of man if one has a lawless attitude. If one doesn't believe in the laws of God, it's hard to even faithfully judge the laws of the land, I think. So that it might take a bribe. Or you just view things differently. I mean, I think the people who violate God's law in their lives, at least do so knowingly, recognize that this isn't right, but do it anyway, can't be just in their dealings with others. So I just thought, the judge who might have an affair going on the side, it's going to affect his ability to judge justly in his everyday life, right? Maybe the mayor who has a homosexual lifestyle, how's he going to manage, how's he going to judge, in the rest of his life? Okay. And then, so Cain chose to violate God's law in one area where God said, this is the sacrifice I want, this is what I require, and he went outside of that, and of course then his whole idea of justice was perverted, and it affected his killing Abel. All right? And a politician or a president who believes it's okay to tell an untruth in some situations, right? Can he be just in other situations? Again, I think that that's one of the reasons why these people cannot understand justice. They can't dispense justice for others because they've chosen to ignore God's law in some particular. So as you're saying that as a person who might turn a blind eye to God's command, if we do it once, then the next time it becomes even more unresistible. Okay. And I guess as you look at the great majority of the people of our country, certainly, God's law is not held in high regard. People don't say, is this right or wrong according to what God says? That's not what very few people ask that now, right? And I think that's why justice is more and more going to be perverted, because people that don't keep God's law in what they know to be right can't dispense justice in other areas. And then the other half of that equation was those who seek the Lord understand all things, or they'll understand completely. How do you apply that in our world? Those who seek the Lord will understand all things. How does that work? I mean, understand all things about the Bible, but that's where it stops. You wouldn't understand how to fix the pear processing plant any better if you, would you? Okay, so those gifts go other areas, right? Do you think I'd be a better neurologist if it says, those who seek the Lord understand all things? Does that mean I'd be a better neurologist if I sought the Lord? That you'd do better in school. Jeff would understand his engineering classes better and get better grades if he spent time seeking the Lord. That Gary would do a better job when he fixed the buses. I mean, you think it really extends, understands all things? It's not just talking about spiritual things, right? It's talking about the rest of our lives too, right? If we seek the Lord, it makes us a better physician, a better mechanic, a better student, right? Okay. A better parent. So I think sometimes we try to compartmentalize and say, well, this is spiritual and that's something else. And so if I want to do really good on my test, I need to make sure that I spend a lot of time studying. And not realize that the time we spend with God affects our understanding in every other area. And we don't, I think we often don't realize that. Or we ignore it. Or we don't believe it to be the case. People resemble what they understand.
For instance, if a person that's a Christian resembles being a Christian, a person that is a robber has tendencies and things, and it was talking here discerning. And when you have the knowledge and understanding, you're able to discern the things. God brings that to mind. The Holy Spirit brings that to mind. You're able to discern certain things. So we resemble. Because when you resemble, you take an interest or you like, for instance, that sin or something. So it becomes desirous, and it also is like fruit. It starts out with a flower and then produces a fruit. But the thing about it is, there is a resemblance in the character of people and their personality, who they are. And because that's their will, that's their desire. So there is a resemblance.
Okay, good. I think the opposite side of things, people can see that sin is blinding. I mean, can you see people that get caught up in sin, the stupid things they do? Just stupid things they do, right? That man who recently was convicted for killing his wife at the theater. You know, as you look at that, you say, wow, could the guy have been any more stupid? Everything about it was just stupid. But that's what sin does, right? Sin makes stupid things appear plausible and attainable. And you know, I mean, you think about the scribes and Pharisees thought they would keep Jesus in the grave by putting a guard there and a little seal on the tombstone. Was that stupid? You know? But so sin makes us do, it blinds us and makes us do very dumb things that people outside would say, I don't know where he came up with that, but that was the dumbest thing I ever heard of. But likewise, pursuing God, reading God's Word makes us wise in other areas, right? That then our choices will be, and our decisions and our understanding will be much broader and greater than it would be otherwise. Well, let's go on and look at Proverbs 28. Actually, let's start with 1 John 2. Proverbs 28 then is talking about the rich and the poor and the dangers of both, but especially the dangers of being rich. And so for background, let's look at 1 John 2, 15 to 17. Who will read that? 1 John 2. You have it, Richie? 1 John 2, 15. Okay, so if you were to summarize this in 5 words or so, what would you say? What's the summary here? Okay, don't love the world, right? Love God. That would be just a summary point. There are 3 parts to loving the world that John mentions. What are the 3 parts to loving the world here? The first one says the love of the flesh. Is that NIV, Richie? The cravings of sinful man. Okay. What do you think those are? The love of the flesh, or the cravings of sinful man. What are they? Okay, gluttony. Okay, food. Food. That's what I didn't write down. Okay, it's a good one though, right? It's true. What else? Pride. Okay. I think of the cravings of sinful flesh as being kind of the physical. The physical. Okay, so food would be a good one. It could be BMWs and Mercedes, right? And that Porsche 911 that I've always wanted to drive, right? The cravings of sinful flesh. It could be a big house, right? It could be stuff and more stuff. Expensive clothes. It could be all kinds of things, right? But it seems like it's the physical. And then the second category that he has there, so there's the cravings of sinful flesh, and the second one is what? The lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes. Okay, lust of the eyes. What is that? That's the new Mercedes. Yeah, okay. I think there's an element to that too. The lust of the eyes, I was thinking maybe, and maybe this is artificial, but that this was kind of has to do more with the mind. Status, prestige, attainment, power, respect, authority. Maybe it's a little less physical and maybe a little bit more mental. Okay, okay, all right. Lust of the eyes, okay. Certainly the beauty of a woman, okay. I mean, one could include that with the lust of the flesh, though. Okay, so it covers this pretty big category. Okay, and then the last one was the pride of life, right? The lust of the eyes, of course, if that's status, prestige, attainment, power, that's everything that Jesus didn't have, right? From a human perspective, at least, that's everything that Jesus didn't have. And then the pride of life. What's the pride of life? Okay, accomplishments, status, okay. And almost to the point of saying, I've really done good, haven't I? Right? I've really earned myself a place in heaven, almost. I'm glad I'm not God. I'm glad I'm not like that guy. Right? Look what a low life he is. And I'm not like that, right? So when I thought of the pride of life, I thought of, isn't this the great Babylon that I have built? That was who? Nebuchadnezzar. Or who's the Lord that I should obey his voice? Pharaoh. Pharaoh said that. Or you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven. That was Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar was Daniel's other name. Belshazzar, right? You've exalted yourself. You knew all this, but you have exalted yourself against the God of heaven, right? And the last one, I will be like the Most High. That was Lucifer, right? So all of these people kind of had that pride of life. Exalted themselves really against the God of heaven. Okay. Okay, that's a good analogy. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. Okay? Because we might say, I don't own a Porsche 911, but I think I'm a pretty good neurologist, right? So each of us have a vice that we're drawn into more easily than the other, right? And we might say, well, I don't do that, but I do this, the other part. Okay. But I think then, since Satan uses, he derails people maybe the most easily with the physical. At least that's where he starts. You know, the first temptation for Jesus was about food, right? It was about the lust of the flesh. It was the physical. It's the money. It's the stuff that we can get. He doesn't need to move on to something else if he derails us with the money part, right? Or the physical. So let's look at a few texts from Proverbs then on wealth and on money. So Proverbs 28:6. Proverbs 28:6. Karen? Better to be poor and honest than dishonest and rich. Okay? Is the point here that you can't be rich and have integrity? Or you can't be poor and perverse? What's the point? The point is what? To be honest, right? The most important thing in life is what we're doing with our relationship with Jesus, right? The most important thing is to live a life of faithfulness, whether we're rich or whether we're poor, right? Money or no money, are we faithful? How about verse 8? Proverbs 28, verse 8. Adrian? Okay. So what's the point here? He who increases his wealth by interest and usury gathers it for him who is gracious to the poor. Okay. And okay, so there's two parts to this. He's gathering it all for himself, right? He's hoarding it, but also there's something about the method he uses. And what's the method that he uses? He's taking advantage of someone else, right? He's taking advantage of somebody who might not have a choice, somebody who might be in bad straits. He's taking advantage of them for his own wealth. Okay? So what's the point here? How do we come by our money, right? Is it important how we come by our money? If we come by our money as a way of taking advantage of somebody else, God says, it's not going to be yours. You're gathering it for somebody else. I'm going to take that money and give it to somebody else who will be gracious to the poor. That's what I think it's saying. Right. So we need to say, how are we doing it? Are we taking advantage of somebody else to get money, to get things? You know, somebody had to have a fire sale, so you offered him, well, I'll pay you this much for that car. You know, you knew it was worth more, but he needed to sell it. So you took advantage of him, right? And there are all kinds of times that we could do that in subtle ways, right? So are we above board? Are we... let's see, read verses 11. Oh, Proverbs 11. Yeah, 11:24. 11:24. We did this several weeks ago. I'll read it. The one man gives freely, yet gains even more. And 25 starts out, the generous man will prosper. Right? That's kind of counterintuitive to our thinking, right? One man gives freely, yet gains even more. We don't think that way. We think we need to take advantage. When we have the opportunity to get something, we need to take advantage of people. We need to somehow take the advantage, and God says that's not the way things work. My system is that by being generous, by going the second mile with somebody else, you're going to be the one that benefits from it.
Even in the lesson, it talked about it resembles a sponge. You take a sponge that's full of water, you can't put more into it. You're generous, you get more out of it. But you take a dry sponge, it's like a quarter rubber and pour. If there's a little drop of water, it will take that one ounce even away from the other one that's dry. But the partial, that has a little bit of water, but does not have, could use more, is very generous because it is received. But both ends are dry, the sponge is separated, you can't take any more in. There'll be two ends of a scale. One that's in the middle has enough, but yet there's another, it does not rob the core, it does not go after the rich. There's no envy there.
Okay.
But man is much like a sponge, okay?
Yeah, I like that analogy. I don't like wet sponges. Try to get my wife to wring them out. Yeah. Okay.
It's like the giver. It's the same way. We're like sponges. When we have enough, it's hard. It takes that hand to press the sponge to get it out of it. And there's some people that are dry, they have it in there, and you can press it, it doesn't come out.
Okay.
But those that are willing, they're easily.
So we don't want to be like a dry sponge that's just taking from everyone else, and we don't want to be like a wet sponge that can't receive anymore. Okay? And Proverbs 28:20. 28:20. Dennis? Yes. Okay, so we have a faithful man who abounds in blessing, but he who makes haste to get rich, he's going to be punished, right? So not only are we held accountable for taking advantage of others, but also, do we want to get rich quick? When somebody offers us an opportunity to say, you could make some big money here in this investment, do we jump at it? Wow, that sounds really exciting. I wrote down, what if somebody said, the attorney said, I'll pay you $1,000 an hour to review this case for me. Okay? I mean, he said, wow, I could use a couple $1,000. And I could buy a new seat for my bicycle? No. Okay. Right? So sometimes those things seem to go like, wow, this would be way more than I usually make. I could really be happy with that. And yet, I think God says if we jump at those kind of opportunities, I think it's better to say, when you get that kind of money, I think if you make that kind of money when you review a case, it biases your mind in your opinion as to what you're going to render when somebody pays you that kind of money. And in the end, it's a bad thing. I think you should say, no, I'm not going to become involved in that kind of thing. That's not a reasonable, I'd help you out for my usual rate that I would see patients for, but I'm not going to charge huge sums of money because I think in the end, it has a bad effect on us when we get rich quickly. And that's such a natural thing, right? So faithfulness versus the haste to get rich. Faithfulness is kind of a slow, steady, doing what you're supposed to do faithfully, honestly, carefully, and God rewards you for it, versus running out and making $1 million overnight. It's never a good thing, and the results are never good. Well, let's close with prayer. Father, we thank you for the lessons that you are trying to teach us. We ask that we would learn to put Jesus first, that we would see the benefit in our lives of being generous, of being faithful, and that we can then teach others, and that our children and our grandchildren and our friends will be able to see the way that you're changing our lives. We pray it in Jesus' name, amen.